Monk, you are now in horny jail. You saw her in the thumbnail and clicked, didn't you? Just for another sight of her, didn't you? Monk! On the scale of scariest monsters, vampires probably rank pretty low. We're so used to seeing them as pale-faced metrosexual men that it's easy to forget that beneath that pretty exterior lies a bloodthirsty daddy. As these best vampire games remind us, no matter their appearance, a vampire is a danger to anyone with a pulse. From classics to games you probably didn't even know existed, we've compiled the best games themed around the bloodsuckers. Filling the role of protagonist and antagonist, vampires are far more complex than many of their undead brethren, which often leads to a game heavy in lore, exposition, and mythology. Ahead of Lady Dimitrescu's, who, for the record, will always be known as the Big Lady to us in the most loving way possible, full debut in Resident Evil Village, here are the best vampire games you should sink your teeth into. Bonk! Stop thinking about her beating you up and leaving you in a ditch, you care. 10. Darkwatch. It's likely that if you were playing games when Darkwatch came out, you overlooked its release. Not because it was bad, but because you were probably too distracted by Resident Evil 4, LEGO Star Wars the video game, Battlefront 2, Devil May Cry 3, Shadow of the Colossus, God of War, Kingdom Hearts 2, Fear, Sly 3, Conquer Live and Reloaded, or the upcoming release of the Xbox 360. The point is, 2005 was a busy year for games, so it was easy for a game like Darkwatch, which was developed by a brand new team, to slip through the cracks. The first and third person shooter put players in control of Jericho Cross, an outlaw that has to come to terms with his new vampiric nature. As a member of the Darkwatch, Cross sets out to kill the vampire that bit him, Lazarus. Darkwatch's gameplay changes drastically between day and night levels, as Cross can only use his powers in the cover of the night. Darkwatch implemented a redemption system that changes what kind of abilities you have access to. The more evil you are, the cooler they tend to be. Cross's action-filled adventure could have been another generic entry in the long list of shooters, but High Moon Studios' effort made it a unique and thoroughly enjoyable vampire shooter. 9. Vampire Knight. Light gun games rarely translate well to consoles, but somehow Vampire Knight became an exception to the rule. Developed by now-defunct developer WoW Entertainment, an in-house team for Sega, Vampire Knight is your standard light gun shooter, taking what works for the House of the Dead series and replacing zombies with vampires. Vampire Knight is just as terribly voice acted as House of the Dead, but that it's so familiar helps make it easier to settle into. Vampire Knight doesn't break the mold as an arcade game, but treading on that safe line of what's expected is what makes it so much fun to pick up and play. It hails from a time before arcade games became complicated, so even novice players could enjoy themselves. As for the PlayStation 2 port, it's clear that WoW Entertainment knew how to use the console's hardware to its benefit. The console version was just as fluid as the original arcade release and worked well with the PlayStation 2 light guns, at least as well as something that could work with them. It's about time light gun games came back, don't you think? Someone released Time Crisis 10 or whatever that nonsense is up to these days. 8. Vampire. Vampires are tragic characters, cursed with eternal life and the need to drain humanity of its life force. Some take to it like serial killers, running rampant without moral restraint. Others loathe their own existence and try to use their afflictions for the good of mankind. Vampire lets you decide which side you fall in and shows you what happens under the weight of either decision. Set in London during the Spanish flu epidemic, players have to decide whether Jonathan Reed, a doctor learning to live as a vampire, follows his medical training to help cure the city, or give in to his thirst and thrust it into chaos. Vampire does a fine job of creating a moral dilemma by making Jonathan a doctor, whereas an average Joe can easily teeter that line between good and evil. Reed took an oath to protect and heal, but with the bloodlust raising inside of him, can he stick to his role as a healer? Vampire needed some polish, but the narrative team at Don't Nod once again succeed at fully developing their characters. Looking at the depth of the story and its cast, it's not a shock that the minds responsible for covering the streets of London with blood are also the same that crafted the heartfelt Life is Strange series. Now we wouldn't say no to a second game. How about you? 7. Infamous Festival of Blood. The second Infamous was an excellent game that couldn't be further from belonging on this list. For the 2011 Halloween season, however, Sucker Punch infused a bit of horror into the series with Festival of Blood. Superpowered Cole McGrath's run-in with vampires is surprisingly fun DLC that combines the core experience of Infamous with the best parts of being a vampire. Using his electricity-based powers and a barbed cross, McGrath squares off against a horde of unholy creatures as he tries to cure his affliction. To survive that long, however, he must give in to his need for blood and drain the citizens of New Marais. Since there's no avoiding draining the innocent, Festival of Blood dropped the series karma meter. Festival of Blood is a quick one-off that only takes a few hours to finish, but the addition of vampires only elevates the fun you were already having in Infamous 2. Now then Sony, what you doing? New Infamous please? Vampires optional. 6. Buffy the Vampire Slayer. A licensed video game on a best of list, we don't even know what's real anymore. What may be most surprising about how good Buffy the Vampire Slayer was isn't that it was based on a TV series, but that it was developed by the now defunct team behind Mark Echo's Getting Up, Contents Under Pressure, the PS2 port of the 1997 Men in Black PC game, extra points if you remember that one, and the Da Vinci Code. Joss Whedon's grim teenage drama is recreated faithfully in this 3D action adventure featuring the likenesses and most of the voices of everyone's favourite Buffyverse characters. One of Buffy the Vampire Slayer's strongest points is its story, which was written by Christopher Golden and Thomas E. Sniegoski, two prominent names when it comes to the Buffy-related books. The game fused melee combat with puzzle-filled exploration for a memorable experience, especially for fans of the TV series. There is no shortage of vampires to stake, civilians to save, and one-liners and awkward karate noises to suffer through in Buffy's only truly successful video game adaptation. 5. Bloodrayne 2. She may have got a lot of flack for being featured in the October 2004 issue of Playboy, Google it, we'll wait, but what else was Bloodrayne supposed to do when her series was pulled out from under her? The sexy vamp had slain the hell out of Nazis in 2 3D action-adventure games before being relegated to a forgettable downloadable side-scrolling arcade title. She deserved better, especially after showing she still had many tricks up her sleeve in Bloodrayne 2. Equipped with 2 admittedly cool arm blades, firearms, and a never-ending thirst for blood, Bloodrayne dismembers, maims, and drains hordes of squishy flesh bags. And she does so with style. The game's protagonist isn't the only thing that's flashy, as combat allows players to string together acrobatic attacks that can send limbs flying. When the going gets tough, Bloodrayne can always resort to her prime instincts and drain her foe, wrapping her legs around them to offer one last thrill before they die. Bloodrayne 2 is a polished improvement over the original and a worthy addition to the slew of hack-and-slash titles that emerged in the early 2000s. It's also a little bit horny. 4. The Twisted Tales of Spike McFang. Wait a tick, a vampire game that's not covered in blood and body parts? You may want to cry foul, but we'll stand by our decision to add Spike McFang to the list, if only for the name alone. Surprisingly enough, this quirky and colourful SNES adventure doesn't have to bank on the protagonist's awesome moniker. Played in a top-down perspective, Spike McFang sends players on a journey to put a stop to the zombie General von Hessler. As the titular young vampire, players won't be sucking blood. Instead, they'll use McFang's snazzy outfit to take on a variety of monsters. Like a vampiric odd job, McFang flings his hat at his foe and frequently relies on his cape for close quarters combat. He also dishes out magic cards that can grant him invisibility, recover his health, and other helpful effects. The Twisted Tales of Spike McFang successfully emulates the Legend of Zelda series without copying it entirely, so it can exist in its own space. 3. Legacy of Kain, Soul Reaver. Blood Omen Legacy of Kain set the stage for Soul Reaver, one of the best games to come from the development team at Crystal Dynamics. Building upon the lore of Nosgoth, a world that's home to both vampires and humans, Soul Reaver replaces Kain, the protagonist of Blood Omen, with Raziel, a spry wraith on a quest for revenge. Despite being part of the same series, Soul Reaver is leagues ahead of Blood Omen. The switch from a slow-paced top-down adventure game to 3D action-adventure helped tell a more engaging story. Though there's plenty of story in its predecessor, Soul Reaver does a better job of delivering it with 3D character models set in a beautiful world ripe with mythology. Nosgoth is a fascinating creation, especially when you're introduced to the ghoul-infested spectral realm. Melee-based combat let Raziel show off his moves, which include impaling his foe on pikes and draining their souls. To cut through their enemies, players wield a soul-devouring spectral sword as they hunt down Kain. It almost feels like a metaphor for how Blood Omen was slain by its successor. 2. Vampire the Masquerade: Bloodlines. After selecting one of 7 vampire clans, players enter the world of Vampire the Masquerade: Bloodlines, the largely successful follow-up to Redemption. The Masquerade universe is based on the 1990s tabletop role-playing game of the same name. It was a new way to explore the in-depth world, and Bloodlines introduced players to a slew of fleshed-out characters in the story-driven adventure. When you're not busy unravelling the 21st century vampiric tale set in Los Angeles, you get plenty of opportunity to do what vampires do best: feast on human blood. Bloodlines gives players access to unique disciplines and abilities, firearms and hand-to-hand combat. Like any good role-playing game, players upgrade their stats to become a stronger, faster and more frightening fledgling. The meat of Bloodlines is pretty standard, which means its story and mechanics have to shine even more. Troika swapped out the point-and-click gameplay of Redemption for a hybrid of first and third-person action, which helps create a faster-paced and more engaging experience. Bloodlines lets you be the vampire you want to be, but draining humans dry comes at the cost of your own humanity. Can't deal with a slightly dated game? A sequel is due sometime soon. And at number 1, Castlevania: Symphony of the Night. Now, some may argue that this technically shouldn't be on a list of the best vampire games since you battle through a horde of different castle monstrosities, but we're sorry, is Alucard not half human, half vampire? Does he not have the abilities of his bloodthirsty brethren? Aren't we on a quest to slay Dracula? Yeah, that's what we thought. Symphony of the Night is the 12th entry in the Castlevania series, if you count the easily forgotten Haunted Castle from 1988. It also is often pegged as the best among all 30 Castlevania games, sometimes vying for the top spot against its chronological predecessor, Rondo of Blood. Ultimately, Symphony of the Night is a more fluid game that appeals to a broader audience than the PC exclusive, later ported to PSP release. As the hybrid son of Dracula, players take control of Alucard 4 years after Richter of the cursed Belmont bloodline goes missing. Symphony of the Night has one of the more enjoyable stories in the series, starting with a prequel fight against the Count. It's intended to be an easy fight, but it sets the stage for a memorable trek through an expansive labyrinthine castle. Yes, the villainous lineup of zombies, skeletons, mermen, werewolves and more overshadows the vampiric foe, but the core story follows vampire hunters on their quest to rid the world of Dracula. And there you have it, there is our list of the best vampire games, as ever, and you know the drill by now. Did you agree with the list? Did you disagree? Would you move the order around? Are there any vampire games that you personally enjoy that you feel like we missed out on? Sign off in the comments down below and let us know your thoughts. We'd love to hear what you've got to say. If you've enjoyed the video, please consider giving it a like, subscribing to the channel and hitting that notification bell so you don't miss out on all the new, tasty, lovely videos we've got coming up for you. We hope to see you in the next one, but until then, not only do we ask you, pretty please, to give the little like and a check out to all the social media on screen, but also just have a lovely day and take care of yourselves and each other. Until the next one, until then, cuckoo.